Well, hello everyone. Yeah, I'm Gloria from Nanjing Foreign Languages School. And there's one thing I'm pretty certain about my own life, and that is I really love music. I began to play the piano at the age of 4, and I was introduced to all kinds of music. And among all the genres that I can name, there are two that are my favorites, and I know them the most. And they are classical music and Kunn opera. Yeah. I always listened to them when I was a child and younger, and sometimes I have some interesting questions. For instance, why among some of the pieces I played on the piano, they have a kind of similar pattern of ending, that sometimes I can even guess which note is going next. And also, why sometimes some Western composers, they borrow some Eastern musical elements into their own creation, but we can easily tell that they have a kind of Western background. And also, when I'm watching Kunn opera performance in large modern theaters, why the accompaniment part is much thicker than those in smaller kind of theaters? With this kind of question, I believe there must be a kind of way that is logical, that is rational, that is beyond my feeling, that can help me explain all those things, explain those details and unique parts in music, and to answer my questions. My curiosity about music theory even grows stronger when I turned into junior high, as I began to listen to something even longer, like symphony, which maybe lasts for an hour or more. At that time, I asked my piano teacher a question. I asked her, well, you know, sometimes when I'm listening to those, I feel like I don't know the structure. I'm easy to get lost. How can I know them? How can I know which part am I in? And my piano teacher said, well, never mind actually. You can enjoy the music without knowing those structures. Yeah, you can just play it like when you're doing something else, like a background music or atmospheric music. And I said, well, yeah, that might make sense. But I was just too curious, so I began my self-exploration about music theory. I began to take some online courses like this one. I began to read books. Some books I can borrow from the school library. Some books about music history, and a biography but actually contains some score analysis. I began to prepare for the AP Music Theory exams, and I began to buy some books about music in Kunn opera. Also, yeah, I took other kind of lessons. Well, for the first few months when I began this kind of practice, I can honestly tell you that my impression was, this is indeed something insane. I can explain it to you in this way. You can imagine, if a piece of music or a song is like a building, then maybe before I learned music theory, I could just view it from a far distance. I can see the overall the shape. It's symmetrical. It's white. Maybe it's made of marbles or something else. Yeah, but now, with this theoretical stuff, I can go inside it. I can see that, oh, there are some stories in it. I can just travel around any story I want. I can name the furnitures. I can name what's the shape of the window. I can know all of this based on my knowledge. They're like greeting new friends. And also, I found out that music theory gives me a kind of logic that can even be appealed to my life outside the world of music. For instance, there's a kind of term called a cadence, which is something that marks the end of a period of music. Yes, they need a kind of signal to tell the listeners that we are reaching an end. And I think this is something very similar to my conversation with my friends in my daily life. For instance, if we're talking about a restaurant, we don't say something like, well, I think this restaurant is delicious, everything's nice, yes, the waiters and waitresses are all nice, and well, nobody says something this way, right? We have to say something like, well, yeah, let's go to the restaurant next day. Yeah, today I still got some homework to do. Yeah, and goodbye, and maybe we hug each other, and then we walk apart. We need a signal. We need something called goodbye. We need a hug to inform each other that our conversation is reaching its end. And this logic is just the same as that in music, which really makes me feel interesting. As a kind of language, music has its own grammar. Different music have different kind of grammars. Western classical music are developed based on a melody line called a theme or shorter one called motif. and then it imitates, and the music can goes on. While in Kun opera, the melody line is based on the pronunciation of Chinese characters, since Chinese is a tonal language, which in Chinese we say this is called 一字形腔, right? Yeah. So that helped me understand the cultural differences between East and West. And also, I think I've never thought about using this kind of way associated with sense, using this logical way to explain a kind of art that I used to thought was completely emotional and sentimental. Yeah. At that moment, I thought that I'm going to tell this to everybody. Has anybody here watched The Lord of the Rings? Well, a little bit pity, but that's fine. I began my music theory lecture about film music in The Lord of the Rings. You know, each different race have their own different theme, their different melody, to inform our audience that we are in that race and about the historical background. And that's really interesting. Yeah, and different kind of race also have different kinds of modes. And the composer used this kind of technique to show which one is older, which one is more ancient, which one is closer to us, have a recent history. I could still remember that day. For I borrowed a music classroom with a really expensive grand piano, and I talked for 45 minutes non-stopping. I was just so happy to share this to everybody. Yeah, and more luckily, I became the music editor of the Blossom magazines, so that I can write some analysis, in this kind of introduction. At that moment, I saw that everything would just go on smoothly. I would learn more about music theory. I would have more keys to open different kind of doors in the world of music. I could learn something like tonalization, about secondary dominant, about even jazz and scales in blues or whatever. And also about how composers composed Kun opera arias. I thought I would just go on learning all of this until something went wrong. I think this should be one of the most memorable days in my high school life. I think most schools have this kind of New Year gala, right? I do not explain to you how happy was I on that day. Actually, everybody's gathering around in the playground, and for me and my friends, there's even one thing that makes us more excited. We've been staying in this campus for 5 years, and this is the first time for us to see fire burning right in the middle of a playground. There was music, there was dancing, and luckily, I was one of the performers. Yeah. So you can see everybody's cheering, everybody's clapping, everybody's yelling. But what was I doing? I was standing next to the stage in the middle of everything and analyzing what I'm hearing. Yeah, this is what exactly happened, actually. I can explain it to you. Whenever a group of singers went down to the stage, and the audience were like, wow, this is epic. I've never thought about hearing something like this in my own school. And I was like, I think the duet in the choir part is really interesting, for it forms a kind of interval that's pretty unique. And then another group of singers went onto the stage with another song. And maybe the audiences would be like, wow, you're a genius, this is so great. And I was like, I think maybe she's a little bit out of tune, but I must say the ending part is have a really interesting chord. So actually, I have to explain it to you that happiness on that night was just something so near to me that I could reach it without stretching my arms. But I didn't feel a little bit happiness while I was always standing next to the stage with a poker face, analyzing the music I've been listening to. I told this to my favorite music teacher in my high school, and she said, well, then maybe you can be a judge in competitions. I laughed, of course, but whatever. New Year Gala is never the competition. It's some time for everybody to have fun. It's some time for everybody to feel the belonging, right? Something that will never be overshadowed by the arduous finals. At that moment, I have this sense of fear. Is my poor analysis and a little bit knowledge in music theory actually replacing my personal feeling? Which means I cannot talk about a single piece of music without saying something like, it's in what kind of key? use what kind of chord progression or that sort of thing. And this reminds me of what Oscar Wilde wrote in the preface of the picture of Dorian Gray. Those who find ugly meanings in beautiful things are corrupt without being charming. I was a little bit miserable, for I have the kind of fear that whether I am one of those. And luckily, I had a good answer for my question. And yeah, and this answer grows out from my experience in the pioneer academics. Well, actually, yeah, I wrote about something I really love. And I basically analyzed two cases, the Qu Qiubai and the new version of the Butterfly Dream, which are two Queen opera plays and made in the 21st century. Because those days, Queen opera plays would be performed in large modern theaters, composers sometimes involved some Western musical elements into their own work. And I was writing something about the score analysis and trying to find out how the composers can make everything smooth about this. So at the beginning, the professor asked us to write a postcard, which is a short part that's something you want to put in your final essay. And at first, my postcard looked like this. You can see that I was analyzing like, this is the A minor, and then modulates to E minor, whatever, ends on the F sharp, and have a dissonant chord, that sort of thing. And my professor asked me one question at that point. He asked, oh, sorry. Oh, there's no movement, sorry. Why is it interesting? Why you're writing this, telling this to everyone else? He said, you've already put your score in your essay. I don't need to read this. I could just read a score, right? I said, well, yes. Then he said, you need to explain. You need to explain what's the effect of those things for the feelings. Yeah. And I also asked my professor another question. I asked him, how subjective should I be? I asked him that if I have some personal feeling or personal understanding of the Queen opera plays I'm analyzing, can I just put it in my essay? Would that be not that professional? And my professor says, well, you know, all the analysis and comments made by human beings are subjective. At that point, I suddenly realized why I feel a little bit miserable during the Spring Festival, the New Year Gala. It was like I was focusing too much on the musical terms themselves and without realizing their actual function that improved the feeling, that enhanced the atmosphere, and enhanced the overall power of the music. Later on, my essay turned out to be like something really different from my postcard. I began to review, went through the videos of the two plays on the internet again, and to try to find out the feeling I got from them without just listing out all the music theory terms. And it turned out to be much better and something I've never dreamed of. So here's a small sum up. So yeah, maybe you can already see that music theory and those sense help me to have a well-rounded perspective of art. Yeah, and if you're careful enough, you can see that this speech itself is actually arranged in the structure of a sonata allegro form, which is a kind of form for music pieces. Yeah. So this really helps me both when I'm listening to music and when I'm not. And I also want to say that personal feeling always counts. I love the remark by J.R. Tolkien that fairies cannot be caught in the net of words, for it's one of its qualities to be indescribable, though not imperceivable. Sometimes we cannot even describe our feelings well, so just let it be. Do not think that the sense is the only thing that you need to chase for when you're just observing art. At that point, I suddenly understand why my piano teacher answered me that you do not need to care about the structure of the piece. You can enjoy the music without knowing that. At this point, I thought, yeah, that makes sense indeed. So sense and sentiment, they work together to improve the art and to improve our lives. Composers or other kind of artists, they use their technique to dictate down or to describe their own feelings and to make them into artworks. And let us feel this kind of feeling. Let us resonate with them. With this kind of cooperative work, our favorite art pieces are just like our best friends. They may not technically be the best, but they could understand us. They could talk to us. They could keep us accompanied through our struggle and strive. They could say out something we really want to say, but we can't. And they could make us feel that we are loved by the others. And that's the meaning of everything. Well, you know, sonata allegro forms are usually used in the first movement of a symphony or a sonata, which means there will be more movements. I believe that there's no certain answer for this question, how should we balance sense and sentiment? But we'll all try to find out the best place for us to stay. And we'll keep on trying that no matter what happens. Yeah, and that's all for today. Thank you.